preparing the stream. And awesome, it looks like we are live. So let me just get back to my session here, make sure that my audio is still working. Great, it is. So as many of you know, my name is Andrew Wall. I'm the managing partner here at CPA4IT. Today's session is going to be on bookkeeping, specifically with QuickBooks Online. So we here at CPA4IT and our accounting firm specializing in service-based professionals. So this is really going to be tailored at those really small businesses. Our mission here is to help our clients organize their finances, create wealth, and transform wealth into a legacy. And today's session on bookkeeping is targeted directly at helping you guys get organized. So what I really wanted to do today was focus in on QuickBooks Online. Now, bear with me 1 second as I pull up my screen. And actually, before I get into that, I guess we should do a bit of housekeeping. So first of all, this session will be for about half an hour. Today, we're going to be looking specifically at the banking section of QuickBooks Online, bank feeds, bank transactions, as well as bank reconciliations, which is arguably the most important section of your bookkeeping. If you have any questions throughout the webinar, please feel free to post them in the Q&A. If you're watching live on Facebook, you can post the questions on the post, and we will have one of my colleagues relay those messages over into our Q&A live, and I will answer them on the video. And if we happen to miss them for whatever reason, we'll circle back and add those answers in later. So what I want to do is first pull up my screen here and let you guys know that if any of you are curious at playing around with QuickBooks Online, you can actually test drive the product free of charge. They do have a sample file, which is what we're going to work with today, that you can play around with. So you just Google test drive QuickBooks Online, and you'll find this post on the QuickBooks site. We're going to look at the QuickBooks Online Plus sample for today. This was a version written by my good friend, Michelle Long, out of the States, actually, which is interesting that they have the Canadian version written by an American. But interesting fact, the US content was actually written by a Canadian. So another friend of mine. So what we're looking at right now is what QuickBooks Online looks like. QuickBooks Online, for those of you not familiar with it, is an online accounting and bookkeeping application. We are big believers in the technology because it leverages artificial intelligence to really reduce the amount of time that bookkeeping can take and alleviate a lot of the frustration that goes along with it. So when you log into QuickBooks Online, it can sometimes be a little bit overwhelming if you've never looked at a general ledger or accounting application before. There's a lot going on. You've got your left-hand navigation. You also have some icons up in the top right-hand corner. Your gear icon is arguably the most important icon that you're going to need, and that's got access to a whole bunch of different features that you can use. Now, as a service-based professional, we're probably going to be only using a fraction of what the power of QuickBooks Online can do. But there are some really important things that need to be done when setting up your QuickBooks Online account. So one of the first things you're going to do is probably want to go to your gear icon, go to your account settings, and look at the information that you have set up within your account settings. So first of all, you want to make sure all your information is updated appropriately, your business number, your company name, your legal name, the type of company that you are. And in here as well, we should have, under the advanced section, you want to make sure that you choose what is the first month of your fiscal year end. This is important because all the reports that you might use are going to be tied into this. And so by default, it's going to default to January, which works if you've got a December 31st year end, which is the most popular year end, but you may actually have a different year end than that. So you might want to come in and say my year end is actually July or August or whatever your fiscal year end is. and make that appropriate change. So that is really important to do. In addition, you might want to set a default tax rate. So by default, you can say exclusive of tax or inclusive of tax. I find this really helpful with setting up your default tax rates. I'm not going to dive too much into tax rates today, other than to say it is really important to know whether you are on the GST HST quick method or the GST HST long method. The reason that is important is because if you are on the quick method, you do not need to extract GST HST on all of your transactions. However, if you are on the long method of HST, you do need to separate out the GST HST on all of your transactions. Now, to set up your taxes, you just go to the taxes center here, and it's got a lot of supposedly helpful things telling you what everything is. So you can go through all this at any time that you like. So we can do our filings and payments in here. The problem to be aware of is if you're not using the long method, if you are on the quick method, the sales tax center unfortunately will not work for you. It only works for the long method of HST. But for most of you, if you're a client of ours, we are going to be preparing your GST HST, but you do need to manage your sales tax by making sure that you've got the appropriate account set up. So here we've got HST Ontario, we've got 0 rated, and we've got exempt. If I was in another province, I might want to make sure that I'm adding the additional provinces that might be applicable. Again, like I said, I'm not going to go into too much depth on the taxes today because I really want to focus in on the banking tab. There is one other item I do want to touch base on before we get too far, and that's your chart of accounts. Your chart of accounts is the list of all the categories that you can use for all your revenue, expense, assets, liabilities, owner's equity, everything that's going to appear on your income statement and balance sheet. The program needs to know where these things go. By default, you're going to have a certain number of accounts set up automatically. This is a sample account, so it's got a full-fledged chart of accounts. But you can add and import a new chart of accounts anytime you want. And in fact, at CPA 4IT, we have a sample chart of accounts that we encourage you to use so that it helps us to do the benchmarking analysis to stay consistent. And if you want to import your chart of accounts, you simply click the gear icon again, import data, and we've got a chart of accounts option. You browse to your appropriate file and you import. It will give you, it'll list all the accounts that it's actually attempting to import. Maybe I'll actually even try and do that real quick because I think I can do this. So you can download this from our share file library under free resources, bookkeeping tools and guides, QBO training guides, chart of accounts, and there's our chart of accounts right there. I'm going to hit next. So you can see it's already matching up the type, the detail type, the account number, or the account name, the account number, and the type, as well as the currency automatically. It'll give you a list of all the transactions it's about to import. And if any of them fail, so it's got 102 accounts in our standard chart of accounts. It will give me a message. Usually this is because these accounts already exist. So it's not going to import those right now. So that's fine. We can just uncheck these. And the rest of the accounts were imported. So we are done. We're going to go back again to our chart of accounts for one quick second to show you that one of the other things that you can do. So if you are on the long method of HST, you probably want to make sure that for each one of your accounts, you're setting a default tax code. Most likely going to be HST Ontario if you're here in Ontario, or whatever is the appropriate default tax rate. That'll make your bookkeeping a lot easier when we go through these transactions. You can also highlight all of these and do a batch action and set the default tax code for all of them. For now, I'm going to do HST on, which would be not really be a good way to do it. You'd want to make sure that you're doing this for the appropriate accounts, because certain categories don't have tax on them. You think your balance sheet items, your banking numbers, those wouldn't have a default tax rate, but all your revenue and expense line items typically would. So maybe I'll even cancel that. So that's importing your chart of accounts and getting your tax accounts, which are the basics. Now I do see that we've got a question come here in the Q&A, so I'm going to jump over to that. How do we know if it's 0 rated or exempt? That is a great question. So give me 1 second here. So 0 rated versus exempt GST, HST. So 0 rated sales are 0 rated sales are transactions that are not subject to HST, but at a rate of 0, right? Whereas exempt sales are exempt transactions that are not subject to HST at all. So there is a difference between 0 rated and exempt. So it literally depends on what it is to go through. At the end of the day, it's going to use the rate of 0 for both. Where it's really important is if you have HST exempt revenue. This is the most common place where you would use exempt sales. So you might have a category of revenue that is exempt from having to collect HST. So in that situation, let me give you an example. There's medical services exempt from HST. So that would be exempt from HST, not 0 rated. So 0 rated is only using when the rate applied is supposed to be 0, and exempt means it's exempt from HST. So I hope that helps. It is not all that clear. At the end of the day, the amount's still going to report as 0. When we file the HST return, if we're reporting any revenue as exempt or 0 rated, we certainly as your accountants will know whether that's appropriate or not. So I wouldn't worry too much about that. So let me mark this as done. Okay. Now I want to jump back into what we've got as far as navigation on QuickBooks Online. So what we have here is we have a dashboard, we have banking, we have sales, we have customers and leads, cash flow, expenses, projects, payroll, reports, taxes, mileage, accounting, My Accountant, and apps. You may not necessarily have all of these depending upon the version that you're running, but what will be in every single one of these is your dashboard and your banking. The dashboard, personally, I'm not necessarily that big a fan of it, but the banking tab, I am a very big fan of, because this is a really essential tool for doing good quality bookkeeping. So one of the processes that you should get familiar with when it comes to bookkeeping is the concept of a bank reconciliation. So a bank reconciliation, at its simplest terms, is taking your opening balance, adding your transactions together, and making sure it equals your closing balance. This is essential because if we are missing a transaction, things won't reconcile and our balance sheet will likely be out of balance. May not be, but it is likely to be a problem. Sometimes you'll also note that you'll see issues in here where, for example, you see how when we're on the banking tab, we have a bank balance and then we have a balance in QuickBooks. So if you have processed all your transactions and you still have a difference between these two amounts, that's likely because you haven't done a bank reconciliation and there is either a duplicate transaction or a missed transaction. And one of the things that we can do with QuickBooks Online is we can do what's called a bank feed. So what a bank feed is doing is using a screen scraping technology to log into your bank scrape all the data off your banking page, and send it over to QuickBooks Online. Unfortunately, in Canada, we do not have open banking, which means that the banks do not provide an API. I think there's only one bank in Canada that has an API, that's CIBC, and it's apparently terrible. At least that's what I'm being told by the developers. And I know it also only works for their banking, but not their credit cards. So it's a failure from an accountant standpoint as being a useful tool. Whereas in the UK, where they have open banking regulations, there's APIs for all the banks, and they have a direct connection, and those connections don't break because of multi-factor authentication. And so you don't have problems with duplicates and errors the way we do in Canada. Unfortunately, because of our banking system being the way it is, where the banks believe they own the data and it's their data, not your data, as a result of that, they, in many situations, do their best to prevent QuickBooks from being able to connect to the online banking information. And with the advent of multi-factor authentication, which is very, very important to have, I would never tell anyone to turn multi-factor off on their bank account. But what can happen is when QuickBooks tries to refresh and update and pull information off your bank account, it's looking for that second factor authentication, and then it's breaking. So you might see when you're getting alerts on your phone because QuickBooks is trying to pull a bank feed from you automatically. So to link in a bank feed, you can simply click the link account button, and it's going to ask you to go and locate your bank and then log into your bank. I'm not going to actually do that now because that is a very simple and straightforward process. Basically, all you're doing is logging in the exact same way that you would log into your online bank account. Once you log in, it's going to recognize that you have potentially multiple accounts. It's rare that people only have one account. And you're going to choose which accounts that you want to actually link here and what account numbers you will use. So our default bank account number is account 100, and that should be for your primary corporate bank account. We also have default account numbers for your credit cards. Don't remember off the top of my head what that is right now, but we can look that up just by going to accounting and our chart of accounts. And let's go credit card. So the default chart of accounts it didn't import theirs because it didn't import because they had one in here already. I believe it's account 300. Let me circle back to you on that. But you would choose the account number. If you have multiple credit cards or multiple account numbers, you can use 101, 102, 103, 104, 105 for the banks. And I believe, don't hold me to this, it's 300 for the credit cards. So it would be 301, 302, 303 for each additional account that you have set up. So once you link those accounts, they're going to appear up here in these little tiles, one for each account that you set up. Now you only want to link your active business credit cards and active business bank accounts. The reason that's important is because we have a lot of clients who will link absolutely everything, and it just makes your bookkeeping more difficult and unnecessary. Good bookkeeping habits is to set up one credit card that you're using for business reasons, and you use that to the best of your ability exclusively for business. Now, if you have an item, you're not sure whether it's business or personal, go ahead, put it onto your corporate credit card. There's ways that we can handle those transactions without, even though they're paid for by the corporate. If you do have expenses that you happen to put on a personal credit card or paid for cash, there's a way to enter those as well, and we will show you that before we wrap today. But you're going to get information pulled in. It'll look something similar to this. And one of the things that we can do is, first of all, we can take a look if there's anything categorized already. We can see if anything's been excluded. You don't want to exclude transactions unless it's a duplicate, because if you exclude it, it basically disappears. Now, if you see these items that say for review versus categorized, one of the things that's really, really important to know and understand is all these transactions that are sitting here right now, these aren't actually in your books. I know it's weird because you're seeing these transactions. What do you mean by they're not actually in your books? what I mean by that is you can think of this as just a list of potential transactions. And in order for them to appear on your income statement and your balance sheet as actual transactions, they need to be added. So you see how there's this add button down here? There's a number of ways that we can add. So for example, I could add this right now. Now, if I hit the add button, it's going to add that to an uncategorized income classification. But that's probably not what that is. It's an ATM deposit. That might more likely be some form of sales. You can say consulting income, um, or it might be a director's advance, right? Whatever the case might be. So you'd want to make sure that you choose the appropriate category. If it is sales, we want to make sure that we're choosing the appropriate sales tax from here. So let's say that we say it's 13%. We can also, anytime we create a transaction for the first time, it's going to ask us if we want to set that as the default category. And whether you're quick method or long method, you always need to separate HST on your sales. If you're a quick method, you do not need to separate the HST on your expenses, only on sales and fixed assets, okay? You could add some additional information. You could select a supplier or a customer, but it's not required. You can select classes. We're not going to go into what classes are, but it's not required. You can add tags, again, not required. Memos, not required. You can add an attachment. And so I see someone is actually asking here in the chat, is there a way to upload a separate receipt? And the answer is yes, you can add an attachment to an individual transaction. There is also a receipts feature in QuickBooks Online. There is also Dext, which we provide free of charge to all of our clients. And again, I'd say come back, we'll do a whole nother session on how Dext interacts with QBO, which is an important way to know and understand. Because when you process transactions in Dext, those are going to come through as expense transactions and then need to be matched to this individual transaction. So like I said before, there's a number of ways to basically take these transactions and have them put into your books. One way is to simply hit add, right? So if I add that, that's now gone from our for review into our categorized section. So we can see that that transaction is now there, and it's a deposits, consulting fees. That's going to appear on our income statement as revenue right now. So now you can see one of the other things that's happened here is because I've categorized an ATM deposit, which had the same description as a consulting fee in the past, the system is using artificial intelligence to say, I think that should actually be consulting fees. Is that correct? And I could simply hit add to add that if I wanted to. But one of the other things that I could do, which is almost more important, is I can create a bank rule. Now, they used to have the ability to do that right from here, but the joy of QuickBooks Online is they do like to move these things around on me. So what I can do is, pretty sure they used to be able to add it right from the transaction itself. But if I wanted to create a bank rule, for example, let's say that we know that there's a description in here, ATM deposit. Oh, there it is. I'm blind. Create a rule. Thank you. So I can either go up to rules and create a rule there, or I can create a rule right here. So let's say I wanted to create a rule here that says, hey, every time I see something that's an ATM deposit, and I want that to apply for both of my credit cards or all of my credit cards, or certainly a certain number of rules, I can say, okay, I want this description, I want this rule to be called ATM deposit. And anytime the description contains ATM deposit, or I might even, you could change that around. Maybe you want it to just say deposit only. I want that transaction type to be a deposit, and I want it to go to consulting fees, and I want there to be HST on sales. Now, one of the other things that we can do is we can choose whether we want this auto add on or off. So if we put auto add on, then anytime it finds a transaction with the word ATM deposit in it, it's going to automatically process that transaction without you having to do anything. Some categories, this might make perfect sense. You can think Things like Shell, Petro-Canada, those types of things might be really easy rules that you set up, um, and they're no problem. But for example, let's say that you had Canadian Tire, the Bay, something like that, where the transaction, maybe most of the time from Canadian Tire, it's automobile supplies, but sometimes it's computer equipment. What you might want to do is have a rule that sets a default, but doesn't actually process the transaction. So you can see now what's happened here is it's recognized this and said, it's gone one step above the AI recognition, and it's gone, oh, this is actually a rule that you've created. And so I can come in here and I could say, let's say I like both of those. I can highlight those two and accept. So boom, those transactions are done. So you can see how that you can do those types of um, processing with bank rules, as well as artificial intelligence. So it's going to learn from your past behavior as well as the rules that you created for it. So the more that you use QuickBooks Online, the better it's going to get over time. I'm just going to mark that question that's come up as answered because I think I've got that. So now we've got some more transactions in here. Are there other ways to get transactions in here? Yes, there are. So we can find a match. So this is important because, as I said earlier, if you're using something like Dext to process transactions, if that transaction has been entered in another section of QuickBooks Online and you add it here, you're going to effectively duplicate that transaction. And this can happen with either revenue or expenses. So some people will, many of our clients will go through a staffing agency and never actually create invoices, or the invoices are created in the staffing agency's time and billing system. So the easiest way to process your revenue is to just go in and record your deposits, set a rule for them, and have them automatically flow into your consulting fees. However, with the expenses, or with some clients, they might actually want to create invoices. And so if you go to your sales tab, which is the next section down, you can create an invoice. And invoices, here's all the sales invoices that have been created already. You can create a new invoice. You can do invoice templates. And again, we're not going to get into the weeds of invoicing right now. But if you're creating invoices, but you're not matching the transaction to the invoice, then you're going to have twice as much revenue, and that could be a problem. Same thing can happen on the expense side as well. So you might have expenses or bills. Now, what's the difference between a bill and an expense? Common question. So expenses are an expense that you have that you're paying at the time of purchase. A bill is something where you might be billed something and you're going to have to pay it down the road. So most of our clients are only dealing with expenses. But you can see that there's a number of expenses in here already that have been processed in this sample file. So these transactions, when you add an expense in here or you add an invoice from the revenue or expense side, those transactions are now in QuickBooks. Remember I said on the banking statement, those aren't really in QuickBooks, because what the banking tab is, banking is used to reconcile the transactions, right? In accounting, we have double entry accounting, right? So we have a debit and a credit for every single transaction. So what's happened here with these expenses, with many of them, is some of them are have been categorized uh, to the appropriate places. Let me take a look at some of these expenses. So on these expenses, they've chosen a bank account. So they're saying, I think this has come from this transaction, the bank account, the checking account. It could also come from, if you had multiple, could come from the credit card account. It could also come from a director paid transaction. So one of the categories that we often use, in fact, is the director's advance. So typically, one thing I'd also recommend doing in your chart of accounts is, if we go to the director's advance here, and we edit this category. Yeah, won't let me. Give me 1 second here. What did I do wrong? The joys of teaching live. Let's see if this will work for me. Okay, now we'll go back to our expenses type. Come on. I'm becoming too impatient. Yeah, it has to be a bank type. I don't know why it won't let me. I have to go back to that chart of accounts and make. Ah, I'm running out of time too. So you want to make this a bank, but it won't let me. It's because it's got a sub account. So let's just blow this away. Okay. But any other account that you've had, normally we set up the director's advance as a bank account, not as a current asset, so that you can actually process expense transactions as being paid by the director. That's important because you might have expenses that you're paying by cash, and those are basically advances from the director to the corporation that you should be later reimbursed for. And that's how you process those transactions that are entered manually. Now, if we go back to the banking, I do want to actually talk about one other thing, which is how do you actually do your bank reconciliation? And so the bank reconciliation, we simply click the gear icon again. We click reconcile. We get started. What you will actually need to do a bank reconciliation is you will need a copy of your physical bank statement, either in a PDF or hard copy. You'll select the account that you want to have. You'll choose an ending date. Usually you want that to be the end of the month. And an ending balance. So this should be the balance that actually appears on your transaction, on your bank account. I'm just going to make something up for now. It's going to start the reconciliation. And what it's going to do is you can see in this situation, oh, we've got a big difference. The ending balance should be $10,890 because it's picking up all the transactions from the bank. And it's going to also pick up the potential transactions that are missing and help you to figure out, okay, hey, is there a duplicate transaction? Has something been missed? But if done properly, if you have processed all of your transactions correctly and your opening balance is correct, what you're going to have is you're going to have the statement, the beginning balance of the statement, plus any payments, minus any payments, plus any deposits, minus any uncleared balances will equal your statement ending balance, and you'll end up with zero difference here. So a good bank reconciliation means that there should be zero difference here. Now, where you might end up with a difference is if for some reason you have a pending transaction that hasn't cleared. So, for example, let's say that you've entered a transaction into QuickBooks and it cleared the bank on the first of the month. Like, so it got deposited on the 31st, but didn't actually show up in the bank balance until the 31st. You know how sometimes that happens, and we have those temporary um, funds in process. So that would be the only exception to that. Okay. So I know, like I said, we've just touched the surface on the bookkeeping and what you can do with QuickBooks Online. We haven't touched on reports or projects or payroll, which we're not really ever going to go into. But the reporting is an important side of it that we will get back to on another future webinar, as well as the mileage tracker. And the mileage tracker, I will remind everyone, if you have a copy of QuickBooks Online, this is included for free. It's an app for your phone. And the number one thing people get audited for is automobile expenses, because someone at CRA has realized that most people are keeping track of their mileage logs. And so when they audit you and you don't have your mileage log, you lose all those expenses. So get in the habit of tracking your mileage every single day. It works like Tinder: swipe left for business, swipe right for personal, or vice versa. I can't remember what it is, but it'll log your trips automatically. You can also add trips manually from this mobile app here, or from the app within the website. But I would highly recommend using the mobile app. Again, we'll get into those in future webinars. And I want to thank you guys for taking time out of your busy day today. Unfortunately, I'm already running a little late for my next session. It is tax season. We're a little bit overtaxed right now. So if you have any questions, please feel free to post them in our Facebook post, and we'll get back to you as soon as possible. Thanks, everybody, and bye for now.